what we are going to talk today is something related to the second section B of Anthropology Paper 1 2020, which is 5A Racism and Eugenics. So, before going into the topic, we have to know a brief introduction of how these two things are connected. So, first we should see what is race. So, what is race? So, this basically you can start with, for example, it was started from 1758 by a person called as Carl. This you would have seen, Carl Linnaeus. Linnaeus. He basically, what he did was, he was responsible for classification of plant and animal kingdom, and this we study as taxonomy of plants and animals in schools and colleges. But he also was responsible for classification of human beings. So he was not only responsible for classification of plants and animals, rather he was also responsible for classifying human beings into four categories. So he categorized human beings on four categories. So that was basically based on geography. So first he categorized as American, then European, then Asian, then African. And if you see, he would have classified plants and animals based on something called as morphology, or based on morphological characteristics. That is, outward characteristics of plants and animals. He classified all these plants and animals. Same way, he used the same technique for this human being classification, where he said he used the skin color. Red for American, white for European, yellow for Asian, and black for African. These terms today have a very negative connotation, and which is not to be used in such fashion as he was using in 1758. But he was, at that time, race or racism concept was very prevalent, and it was not seen as improper to use all these languages. But this was the start where he classified race people into different race. And this, what happened, this was in 1758. But this was taken forward by what is called as racism. Race, basically, what he is doing is he is classifying people based on morphology, which he thinks that it is biological. That is based on biology. He is classifying people. But racism came afterwards, which was at the period of 1800s to, you can say, 1900s. So this concept which Carl Linnaeus uses for classification is taken forward by people into something called as racism, where you have to see that race is a distinction or a classification of people or human population into distinct groups. But racism is a concept where they say that one group is greater than the group two. So this kind of classification, that is high and low. So they classified these races from high to low. So this classification is what is called as racism. So race is basically division of people based on, or initially was based on biology, but then racism came, which grouped people based on these races into high or low. And this gave rise to something called, this is what created the problem. This gave rise to the following. So, what was the consequence of all these things? You can see that this was not only a consequence, rather, this racism was used as a tool. So, why was this used, or what was the need of racism at that time? It was used as a tool for slavery in America. That is, uh, black African Americans were taken predominantly from West Africa to America for working in cotton fields and other menial jobs. But the thing was that this racism or this ideology of one group of people or population being lower to another group of population was seen or used as a mechanism for justifying. So these tools were used for justification. So these racism was used as a justification or legitimizing this act. This inhuman act was legitimized using this concept of racism. But this was not the only thing. You have to know something called as colonialism also existed. Colonialism, basically, you can see that white man's burden. They say because they felt that Eurocentric in the sense that Europe was the center of the world and it was having this or this race of people, this stock of people, this ethnicity of people, where or should be the people who have to take care of the world event. And this is actually a consequence or a tool used for justifying inhuman acts. And the three, you can say what was the consequence. You can very well see in anthropology there is something called as classical anthropology or classical anthropological thinkers. If you find Taylor, Morgan, these people would have classified cultural development based on savage barbarism and civilization. If you see, these people were also Eurocentric and felt that the cultures which were there in Africa, Asia, India, Australia were not that much developed as the ones which is developed in Europe is what they felt. But you should see that all this is bordering around something called as racism, and hence this consequence was out of this concept called as racism. But this, how does this in any way is connected to something called as eugenics? Because that is the question. So eugenics was a concept you should know was given by someone called as the Galton. Galton, as you might be aware, is is very familiar or was the cousin of Darwin. So he was very much influenced or very much in awe of Darwin's achievement, and he wanted to become someone greater than Darwin. So he wanted to achieve something greater than Darwin, and he tried a lot of things, but he could not succeed in any of the things. And finally, he came to this topic or found this ideology which is called as eugenics, where he said you is good, genics is hereditary. That is, he was meaning that he used something called as Darwin's artificial selection. That is, artificial selection is for animal. Darwin used artificial selection for animals, especially not cat, especially if you see not cats. Darwin uses this theory for something called as dogs, cows, and other varieties. He says, for example, dogs and cows in the wild were very ferocious. For example, dogs came from wolves. But how have they transformed into such docile, lovely animals? Is because we chose, or artificially we selected artificially. That is the point. We selected artificially the animals which has to be propagated. That is, it was our choice to propagate a particular animal with a particular set of traits, and hence they have turned out into what they are now. And this is the concept eugenics uses. This is the concept Galton uses to justify what he is saying is that he is asking selection, artificial selection of human beings. So he is saying instead of selection of human beings, this is the point. So he is using this concept of artificial selection of Darwin for taking forward this concept where he wants to select human beings with a particular set of traits. He wants to select people with a particular set of IQ, beauty, morphology or anatomy. He wants to select the people in such a way that he wants to propagate only the good gene. He wants to propagate only the good gene and leave out the rest. And now this is basically eugenics. This was what he deciphered. And but this concept how this racism and eugenics coupled into a deadly mix of poison is what we will see today, or is the core of this question. So what happened was this tool as slavery, as I said, was 1800s to 1900s, but eugenics was somewhere around 1900s to 1920. Then the deadly mix started from 1920 to 1950, and this deadly mix, you will know, was someone called as Hitler. Hitler used this concept of eugenics or good genes. He called it as racial purity. He called it as racial purity. That is, he wanted to have only the Aryan German race to be present, and should not be mixed with Jews, specifically Jews. And he specifically had laws called as Nuremberg laws. Nuremberg laws, these laws, what they did, these laws prohibited marriages between the Aryan German citizen and the Jews of German origin. This prohibited that. So this he justified, saying that Aryans, or the people of German race, are superior, and hence you should know that is racism, and that superior race has to be protected, or that eugenics, that good genes have to be developed, rather than uh, rather than hindering or mixing of genes. This is one example. But the United States 1920s, USA also had such laws, eugenics justifying laws, where they say that should be sterilization. There was forced sterilization of people with low IQ, people with mental disabilities. So people with the mental disabilities now seen as social phenomena. At that time, they were seen as propagating bad gene, and hence they were sterilized. And if you see same thing, this is a consequence of eugenics, where they say that only proper good genes have to be propagated and the bad genes have to be removed. And the third consequence was anti-immigration policy. Anti-immigration policy was very much prevalent in America in the 1920s, 1900s to 1950s, and it was also prevalent in Australia as well. Australia, America had these anti-immigration laws which were racist, in the sense that they did not allow people from a particular country, example Africa, to be immigrated into USA. And this was not the case in 1900s only. You can see very well that Donald Trump, the former president, used the same statement as immigration of people from Africa should be banned, is what he said. And this is an if you see, this is a mixture of racism and eugenics. And this is the concept, this is the basics you should know before writing the answer, why racism and eugenics are connected. But now coming it back to the answer. So this is a 10-mark question. So this is a 10-mark question, and hence there are 2 pages in it. So 2 pages. So first, what should be written? First should be written, what is racism? So you should write, race is biological. It is biological, but racism is cultural superiority. Cultural. So racism basically is biological and cultural classification or of population, and terming a particular race as higher or lower, and that is called as racism. So that one point you have to write. Then characteristics which they use. Characteristics which they use. What are the characteristics they use? There are many examples in Peanut. You can use color, you can use hair, you can use blood group. So use the examples or which are given in Peanut. So second point has to be that. Third point you have to write is eugenics. What is eugenics? So, as we have discussed, you should write about Galton. You should write about what is or good genes getting propagated and bad genes not being propagated. So, three divisions have to be there in the first page. In the second page is where you have to racism and how eugenics are connected. So racism and eugenics, how they are connected. The example of, as I said, Hitler, example of how the Nuremberg laws had this concept of racial purity and the forced sterilization example, and then the example of anti-immigration policy. Even today, this example you can use immigration policy where there is a outrage where people from Africa, if they are migrating towards Europe and America, they are seen as not proper mechanism, and hence you should know. And then caricature. This also you can have caricature of race. This was based on eugenics and racism. As an example is what, as I said, eugenics was a concept where they started wanting better features or better. This is the point. They wanted better features to be propagated. So the eugenics, that is good genes, but at that time there was no concept of gene, and hence it was basically better features, better people with better IQ, better people with better beauty. This is what Galton basically wanted to propagate, and this actually gave rise to something called as anthropometry, that is measurement of features. So measurement of features, when it happened, it basically led to something called as caricaturing, that is people of a particular race were caricatured in a very bad way, and this it happened in prominently in the time of Hitler, where people from the race of Jews or people from ethnicity of Jews were caricatured in a very bad way, and that led to what is called as the euthanasia. That is complete annihilation of or complete the dangerous thing which happened in Auschwitz and many other places where people from a Jew community were killed in a large number, and that was a very big black mark on the humanity. Is you should write the present relevance. What is present relevance or of racism? You should say there is no relation between IQ and race, because IQ, as they have discovered, has a lot of genes attached to it, and not only genes, the amount of food someone eats, or the culture in which they grow, the atmosphere, the circumstance, the war, and everything is responsible for IQ of a person, and hence it is never related to any race. Same way is you can say that the genetic differences you can use at a molecular level. They have studied and they have found that there is no major genetic difference between races. Actually, every population is seen as somewhat. There is a small variation according to the geography a person resides, but they have not found any difference between races. And you can also include UNESCO's definition.
So if you like this video, please like, share and subscribe to Minds of Aspirant. You can send this video to anyone who is preparing for civil services and to your family members who want to know about civil services also. There is a Telegram channel, Minds of Aspirant official as well. You can click that link and join the group, and you can ask for whatever doubts that you have. And also you can click the bell icon so that you will get regular updates from Minds of Aspirant. Thank you. All the best.